as a point, to be honest, because we put that notice on our website. We also put notices on the web pages that host the 2 reports that we did on that. We reached out to parliamentarians. We also know that environment and climate change and government officials in general were fully aware of the issue. Making a big show of this could have been counterproductive without having updated numbers.
The parliamentary budget officer on this program just moments ago responding to criticism of his office that came from Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's parliamentary secretary. Critics of the government's carbon pricing system often point to the PBO's report that found most Canadians would be slightly worse off for the tax. Last month, though, he quietly published a note, or his office did, announcing that there had been an error in their initial analysis and promised an update. The finance minister's parliamentary secretary wrote to his office in a letter that reads in part, "With great respect, correcting the record on your analysis of the fuel charge is necessary to maintain the integrity of your office." The PBO told us he doesn't expect his overall conclusion to change. So what does that mean for the carbon tax political debate? Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. Saeed Selvam is the Vice President and Practice Lead of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. Next to him, that's former Ontario NDP MPP Guratan Singh. He's now Vice President at Crestview Strategy. Also, we always disclose, the brother of federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Larissa Waller is with GT and Company. She's a former head of communications for Ontario Premier Doug Ford. And Marika Walsh here in studio with me is a senior political reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you tonight. Marika, I'll start with you. He's going to release a new report, a new analysis in the fall, the PBO told me. But overall, he went to great lengths to say and explain why he doesn't think the conclusion he reached in the economic analysis that slightly more Canadians will be worse off because of the tax will change. Like, does that matter politically?
It's hard for me to see that changing the die that has been so firmly cast. I don't think people are waiting either for the first report from the PBO, the second report from the PBO, or a new report from the PBO to make their decision on the carbon tax. They've already made their decision on it, and the changes from the PBO report are not going to change the headwinds that the government's facing. That said, the talking point that has come out of his report, that it does not leave the rebate that is in place everywhere about Quebec and BC, does not leave the average household better off, has been very potent in shutting down the Liberals' main argument to justify their system. And so if there's any shift there, of course the Liberals would want to see that very public. But it might come back at them as a boomerang if it actually confirms just the original report.
Yeah, I should say that the portion of, and this was discussed in our last segment, Guratan, the portion of the analysis that was missing that they corrected was around the industrial carbon price. Essentially, that wasn't factored in the analysis, but he kind of explained on the show why he felt that didn't have a huge economic impact because of the way the pricing system is structured on the industrial side and how different it is from the consumer side. Is Marika right that essentially, like, the jury's out, I should say, not to preempt our next subject, but the jury has made its decision on the carbon tax in the court of public opinion?
I think that is definitely a factor. But in addition to that, we need to recognize a few things. Yes, the climate crisis is real, and it's something that we need to collectively work against. But overall, the issues around the carbon tax have been a variety. There's issues around communication. They did this carve-out, so there's perception that this is a tax that is not being fairly applied across the board. And so because it's such a weak foundation already, when you see these issues come forward, or these criticisms, whether they are legitimate or not, it's still going to feed into this narrative that there's something wrong with this regime. So it's an important issue. Of course, we need a price on pollution. Of course, we need to address and tackle the climate crisis. But this is another response to the Liberals being unable to manage a really crucially vital piece of policy. And the repercussions are that it's actually creating so much distrust towards taxation around pollution, which is important. So to me, it's ultimately a loss for Canadians, and it's a result of Liberals not being able to do their communication job accurately.
Saeed, not everyone in the country knows what the PBO is, but they have certainly heard the argument that the Conservatives have put forward on a multitude of times, and Marika referenced this, that the PBO concluded overall Canadians would be worse off. And what the PBO did conclude on the economic side was that a slight majority of Canadians would be worse off. On the fiscal side, the opposite is essentially true. And so each side was using the PBO so frequently to bolster their arguments. Do you anticipate that that is kind of diluted because of what's happening now?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues here is the integrity of the PBO. And I think that when it comes to the Liberals, it makes sense that MP Turnbull is using this opportunity to criticize the integrity of the PBO, because at the end of the day, an error is an error. So whether it was marginal, whether it was done quietly behind closed doors, or was done in a very public fashion, the integrity of the institution, especially nowadays when it comes to politics and how the public views public institutions, is so important. So it makes sense that MP Turnbull has actually brought this to light and is criticizing the PBO publicly. But it also bolsters Poilievre's point, especially given what the outcome is. If the outcome of the report hasn't changed a whole lot, at the end of the day, if this leaves Canadians worse off, this carbon tax, and this already super unpopular carbon tax, it's still not going to be a win for the Liberals in any way, shape, or form.
Larissa, do you anticipate that what happened in the past few days, I should say the Canadian press first reported this, at all changes the position of the Conservatives or the way in which they frame this, or their referencing of the PBO?
Listen, I disagree that it makes sense that MP Turnbull brought this up, for the sheer fact that I can't imagine why on earth the Liberals would want to bring this back up into the news. Every time it comes up, it's a loser for them. There's no scenario where they can win on this issue. To Marika's point, Canadians' minds are made up on this. The PBO piece and the PBO reports and his analysis, it's a great talking point in a press release. It's a great talking point in a news article. It comes up at question period. It comes up on shows like this. Nobody at their dinner table is talking about what the PBO is saying about it. They're talking about gas prices. They're talking about grocery prices. They're talking about cost of living. And it's not the PBO who's up there on a ladder every night changing the gas prices and making them go up. It's not the PBO increasing the gas prices every year because the carbon tax is an escalator tax. Canada's a big country and people drive a lot. Canada is cold and people heat their homes. The carbon tax has already been proven to be wildly unpopular with Canadians, and it makes absolutely no sense to me as somebody who works in political communications and has for a really, really long time to want to bring this up. Even if he was right, which the PBO is sort of like saying, maybe not, but even if he was right, from a communication strategy, it doesn't make sense to me.
It's such a great point, Marika, that, like, I get it. You're upset. This has been used against you. You feel passionate about the program. But if you look at any public opinion polling out there and even just talk to people at the door, for example, you would probably arrive at the same conclusion Larissa did. It's just like, why do you want this to be talked about again right now at all?
Yeah, and I'm not sure PMO signed off on this. I actually don't know if they did.
Just sorry to interrupt, it's interesting that they delegated the parliamentary secretary to Chrystia Freeland to say, like, that says something too. Maybe
and Stephen Guilbeault today seemed rather unbothered in the transcript of the scrum that I read from him on how the PBO handled it. And, you know, for me, what strikes me is, like, this questioning of the integrity of a parliamentary watchdog feels like just something that happens when governments are long in the tooth. I mean, we saw that with the Harper government. He created the PBO. And then in the final years of his mandate, you know, he was such a thorn in their side. And it just feels like that same thing. You know, the PBO, whether he should have sent out a press release, I don't know. But he told all the MPs there was an error. They all had that information. They could have all sent it out on their social medias, like their menstrual bracelet pictures from yesterday, on this in April, and they didn't.
Garajan, just sort of picking up on what both Marika and Larissa said, and the idea of, I guess, how much of a cleavage this issue continues to be. We are heading, to your point around the importance of fighting climate change, like, we are heading into the summer. A few weeks ago, the lead story on my radio show every day was the fires. You can hear the framing from the Liberals in question period and outside, trying to say every time they get a question on the policies they've employed, you know, well, you don't really care about what's happening. You know, you would let the country burn, basically is the summation, I think, of the argument they're putting forward. Do you think that whether or not that resonates is context dependent, like what happens this summer, or are people just kind of tuning them out regardless?
I don't think it's about tuning things out or not, but I think it's a reflection of how desperate times are right now. So when you're struggling to make ends meet and you're struggling to put food on your table and you're struggling with your mortgage or your rent, those become the immediate concerns that absorb you. Now, when the fires start to consume parts of the country or huge parts of the country and people have an inability to access clean air, then it becomes something that's top of mind. But when that season passes, I fear that then those other issues come to the forefront and dominate the political discourse again. So the problem, I think, that has happened in general is that at a time when people are desperate, they're looking for anything really as a form of relief. And because of the lack of appropriate communication around a price on pollution and because of the mishandling of the carbon tax, the result has now become the solution to unaffordability. And we know it's not the solution to unaffordability, but that's the communications angle. It becomes, if we just got rid of this tax, people's lives would be more affordable, when we know a price on pollution is important for a larger economic argument around fighting climate change and the negative impacts of climate change. So I think it has to do more with that than a specific rejection of the idea. It's more so people are just trying to get by day to day, and the day there's not smoke in the air is a day that they're more concerned about axing the tax than they are about fighting the climate change in that particular moment.
I would also say, even looking back exactly a year ago, if you think about what happened last summer, say, despite all the fires, for example, and the degree to which they certainly impacted Canadians' lives, like that's when the Conservatives really took off. That's when the issue of affordability really took off, and the Conservatives kind of began to cement this massive lead that they've basically held on to ever since.
They really did. And at the end of the day, when it comes to the current government, they're going to wear whatever problems are happening in the country. And when it comes to the carbon tax specifically, what I find interesting is that, you know, the timing of the introduction of the carbon tax was so important, because when it's done outside of the wildfire season especially, it's going to be extremely unpopular. When it's done during, or if it were to be done during the wildfire season, it would have still been unpopular, but a little less so. Doing so, you would have had the Prime Minister in a position where he would have been able to say, well, look, this is the reason why we need to introduce a tax like this, because it's affecting all of these communities and all of these people and all of their homes and possessions. But during this current economic crisis, where people are so focused on cost of living, kitchen table issues, that is what they're concerned about. So any sort of tax that is introduced at this point in time is going to be, of course, unpopular, and it's going to cause a massive issue for their electability down the road as well.
I've got 30 seconds left. Last word to you, Larissa.
Yeah, you know, just on the wildfire season, I think what people are actually figuring out is that global climate change is a global problem, and Canada is about 2% of global emissions. So even if we do everything right, we're still not actually having a massive impact on climate change. So there are other things I think our government should be focusing on in terms of green technology and in terms of convincing countries like China and India to reduce their emissions.
Yeah, that's a whole other debate for sure, one that I'm sure we'll have coming up.